Welcome to 911 What? Thank you guys so much for joining us today. And boy, do I have a treat for you. Today, my guest is Mr. Deon Joseph. He has been with the LAPD for about 25 years now, and he's done some incredible things, such as he's worked on Skid Row, he's been an undercover officer, he's been a lead officer. He's done it all, and we're going to talk all about that. We're also going to tackle some of the issues dealing with homelessness and mental illness. So this is probably going to be a very, very educational show. So please stick around for this. And we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back right after this. So welcome to 911 What? Thank you so much for listening today. I appreciate you tuning in, and make sure you tell all of your friends about it, share it, like the episodes, and make sure you follow us so you know when the latest episodes are coming out, because we don't want you to miss a thing. But right now, let's get right to my guest, Mr. Deon Joseph. Deon, how are you doing today?
I'm blessed. Too blessed to be stressed. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing very well. And thank you so much for taking some time out with me. I know you've been doing a lot. You've been burning up the roads. You've been on national TV doing all this cool stuff. And now you get the big time. You're on 911 What? So I can't thank you enough.
Finally, I made it.
So
Thanks for having me, brother.
Yeah, absolutely. Why don't you go ahead and just introduce yourself, tell us kind of what you've done and where you've been as it relates to the LAPD. And let me get this out of the way right now. Neither one of us represent any particular police department. He is representing himself. He is not representing LAPD. He's not representing DEA or anybody. I'm not representing the Chattanooga PD. These are two individuals talking about our personal experiences, and hopefully you can learn from those as well. So Deon, take it away.
Well, I'm a Los Angeles native, born in Los Angeles, raised in the LBC. I come from a family of people who always engaged in outreach. My mother and father raised 41 foster children in their 47 years of marriage.
Wow.
Yeah. And on top of their 4 kids and 3 grandkids. So I was around for about 17 of those kids. And they taught me to show love to people from a place that no one expects. And my dad, he grew up in the Jim Crow South. He started a business and reached back and hired individuals who reminded him of himself. They had made mistakes, but he gave them a second chance. And they helped marriages, helped save, rescue people, provided jobs for people in the Black and brown community through construction and real estate. And they put all that in me. So I had no dreams of becoming a police officer, but I ended up becoming one because I was not a fan of cops at all.
Wow.
But anyway, I ended up becoming a police officer out of necessity. I was out of work for several months. I met this fine woman who I'm married to right now, my beautiful wife, Tasha. And I didn't want to be a trifling brother. So let me go ahead and do this police thing. Even though I hate cops, I'm going to do it for 3 years and I'm going to quit.
Man.
So then I joined the police first, was on probation at Venice Beach, which was a interesting experience. Interesting people in Venice Beach, kind of very diverse, but kind of bohemian style lifestyle. And then I ended up working in Skid Row about a year later. I didn't want to be there. Well, from what I heard, I only went because they have what's called the compressed work schedules, the 312, work 3 days off of 4, you know what that is. But I didn't know that homelessness was as rampant as it was there. I didn't know that was the mecca for all things homeless. So I ended up going there and I was shocked. The first day I got there, I wanted to leave. Like imagine driving on the 110 freeway if you're in California, you know what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. And you see the beautiful picturesque LA skyline, the West Coast symbol of America's economic might and power. And you go, come on, that can't be that bad. And you get down there and you see people in business suits drinking lattes and smoking on cigarettes. I'm like, oh, this is pretty cool. But then you know how you get to some bad areas, there's like a 1.5 mile stretch that warns you first. You're now entering Hoodville, right?
Yes.
There was no warning here. As soon as I crossed Spring Street, it was like, man, no bifurcation anymore. I was in the heart of the worst tragedy that I'd ever seen in my entire life. Many people in the streets, having sex on the sidewalk, smoking crack in broad daylight, homeless, mentally ill individuals walking in the streets, ambling with hospital gowns on and medical wristbands, blocking traffic, jumping in front of buses, people fighting in the streets in broad daylight. And the smell, I'll never forget it, was feet, butt, corn chips, and alcohol. Like picture New Orleans on a Saturday night, magnified by times 10. It was horrible. And I wanted to leave. I prayed to God to get me out of there, but I ended up finding my calling. And through that, I was a patrol officer for several years in Skid Row. I just became kind of a champion for them because above my head, the upper echelon of the justice system was like, oh, that's just Skid Row. That's just the stuff that's supposed to happen to them. Mm-hmm. And I could not tolerate that. So like my parents, I ended up finding my calling. So 7 years of patrol. Then I did 2 years as a undercover vice investigator at Skid Row, which really, really peeled back some layers for me. I mean, man, people who you thought were the good guys, I discovered were not the good guys at all. Then I became a training officer, and then I left 1 year to go work with juveniles. Kids have a special place in my heart as well. And then I came back and became the lead officer in charge of their safety. And it's been a blessing through that. I created programs to mentor children in Skid Row, empower women through a program called Ladies Night, because women in Skid Row are told that if you're raped or you're abused, don't go to the police because they're going to arrest you. They're going to find a reason to arrest you.
Oh,
And when
wow.
that, I have some stories today. Maybe we can talk about that a little more, but stories for days. And I had to be the one to tell them that, no, we're not going to arrest you for a warrant because you got raped or because you were engaged in sex trafficking when you were raped. I'm not going to arrest you. All I want to get is the predator who hurt you. And that was a great program that I started, still going to this day.
What's the
Old
name of
Blue
that?
Beats,
What's that program called?
Ladies Night. Ladies Night. And my saying is, I don't care if you're a prostitute on the pole, on probation or parole, or undocumented, you deserve the level of safety and concern, just like any Hollywood celebrity does. And when they got that, that really kind of changed the nature of the area to a degree when they knew that the police were actually there for them. All it took was an officer coming forward and saying it. Some people you just have to literally say it and then prove it. And I got stories for days about that. And then Old Blue Detail, trying to get patrol officers to engage in community policing, and it worked for about 3 years. It was a great program. I found 7 officers who were just as passionate as me. I always like to tell people it's not just me.
Yeah.
I was just the one bold enough to stick my neck out and say, hey, I'm not buying your narrative about policing. I'm not going to allow you to tell my story. I'm going to tell my story. And I'm going to tell the story of the 800,000 men and women who mostly do a decent job in this country. And we did just that and build bridges. So many wonderful things. And then that led into other things. I know that I was limited in a uniform. So that's why I branched out, decided to share my stories and stories of inspiration and knowledge with other police agencies, clergy groups, politicians, and really try to educate them on the realities of homeless and mental illness so we can change this from a truth-based foundation, not a political one. So that's me in a nutshell.
Wow, man, that's a lot. And I was going to ask you, you see images of Skid Row, and I've heard the term Skid Row, but I've never seen Skid Row. Now, I've been to Hollywood, and I was so disappointed with Hollywood because I'm like, you have like a couple of streets and you make a left or right, and it's just disgusting looking.
Yeah.
At least at the time that I was there. But I don't think saw Skid Row. And what you described is that's unimaginable.
Yeah, it's real, and people don't understand. And when I say that, I'm not trying to, exploit the homeless and say negative things about them to get you to see things my way. That's not what I'm doing. First of all, let me humanize them if you don't mind. There are 4 groups of people in Skid Row like anywhere else in the United States of America. The first group are good people. There are a whole lot of good, decent, wonderful people in Skid Row. They're just disenfranchised. They fell down on hard times, and Skid Row is the only place in town that'll take them. Then you have the second group, which are good people who do bad things. These are your drug addicts. And I call them that because when they have an environment conducive to change, which is the key to sobriety, especially in places like Skid Row, giving them the proper environment, they end up making better decisions. They end up benefiting from programs, and they do better. And you end up finding out that these individuals, they weren't born on Skid Row. They're educated, they're smart, they had jobs, they had career. There's just one smoke of a rock. That's why they call rock cocaine one and done, or one hit of meth or heroin. And that's it. Their whole world got erased, and they ended up in Skid Row later. Then you have the third group, which are career criminals, ex-convicts who made mistakes. But it's been proven that when we were able to give them an environment, which we did from 2005 to 2010, conducive to change, these individuals actually did well for themselves. Okay. And then you have the last group, which are career criminals, hundreds of gang members, drug dealers, loan sharks who descend upon Skid Row to prey on all 4. Now, here's what's different about these groups juxtaposed to anywhere else in the United States of America. Here's what's different. Because Skid Row is this tiny, concentrated 50-block area that's really super, super tight. Imagine Washington,
blocks?
50 blocks.
Wow.
That account for 45% of all of our crime, right? Imagine a DC street. You know how tight those DC streets are?
Yes.
That's Skid Row, small and tight. Now, because it's so congested, there tends to be this constant and frequent cross-contamination of those 4 groups, and this is what it looks like, and I want the American public to understand this. The good people are forced to look the other way so they don't become a victim of crime themselves. We've had many good witnesses on camera who will see a shooting, a stabbing, but when we talk to them, it's like, I don't know. I don't know. I didn't see it. Then you have the second group, the good people who do bad things. They stay on the bad side longer. Why? Because the temptation is too great to fail. How do you get clean when the drug dealer is not only outside of your drug program, but now they've taken over your drug program and are in your low income supportive housing unit where you're supposed to be getting sober? Then you have the third group, the criminals who made a mistake, but they're trying to get it together. They only get $221 a month on GR, and they're looking outside their window of their low income supportive housing. They got nothing in their cabinets, and they're seeing a drug dealer make $1,000 a day on the corner. What are they going to do? They're going to go find work, right? Because some of them have families and things and needs they have met too. And the last group, the career criminals, pull all the strings and run to political activists to make us look like the bad guy for trying to stop it by any legal means necessary. That's the real Skid Row. It's a recovery zone that has 108 programs designed to help people with a myriad of issues, from alcohol addiction, drug addiction, mental health, chronic homelessness, you name it, it's there. But it's not as effective as it should be because of where it is. Whenever you centralize services like that, especially in an area that's adjacent to cities like Inglewood, Watts, Compton, Long Beach, Carson, Pasadena, what you're going to have is the disenfranchised from those communities who are going to go there for help. Those are the people that we want there. But who's going to follow them? The negative exception of those communities, knowing that they're addicts. So there's a plethora of customers there to take advantage of and keep them on an endless spiral of addiction. So that's the reality of Skid Row. And we really need people to pay attention to that, because what the public wants to sell you on homelessness, that people are out in the streets because of housing. And for some, that's true. But for the most part in Skid Row, the people that you see in the streets, it's not because of housing. 2/3 of them are addicted to some kind of hard narcotic. And no matter what you offer them, you can offer them a mansion and they won't go. You're talking to a man who in 10 years housed 150 homeless people. And half of those people, when I housed them, walked out of their housing because they didn't want the rules. It was too quiet in the room, or their loan shark came and kicked them out and started setting up shop in their hotel room.
Oh my goodness.
So now also a fact behind that is, now there was 2,000 people on average sleeping in the streets of Skid Row. Everybody knew if you needed a housing and you needed a leg up, go to Officer Joseph between 2005 and 2010. How come only 150 came? Because they weren't ready for change. And without a push and accountability and mandatory drug programs and using enforcement to get people to these services and softening laws, most of these people are not taking advantage of drug programs. And that's why homelessness is not just exacerbating in Skid Row, but across the country due to failed and bad, horrible ideology and policy.
Wow. So when you first went to Skid Row, kind of went kicking and screaming, so to speak, but did you feel alone? Because, or were there other officers that had some of the same ideas as you that you could pull together with this, or were you all alone? Like, look, something's got to change and I'm going to be the change.
Well, I know there were officers who cared, but once again, they were alone themselves. And some of them became burned out, which is a human trait. It doesn't mean they're bad people. Apathy sets in when you don't have support. We have doctors who become apathetic. They just put a tag on somebody's toe and give up, and that's it. You see it so much, you become numb to it. And that's the unfortunate thing. It doesn't make them bad people. It's just the way I was raised. I'm a man of faith. I have faith in people. My parents had faith in people. That candle never went out in me. With every tragedy, I sprung back up to be motivated 10 times more. And that's just primarily because of my internal DNA of how my parents raised me and my understanding of God. And like I said, I'm not preaching to anybody, not apostolizing, but, I believe God never gives up on us. So he holds us accountable and not giving up on people. And that's why I haven't burned out. But yeah, a lot of officers did feel alone. And at some point, they kind of like, this is not going to change. So they just needed a guy like me to come and show them that it was possible.
Wow. How surprised were you of yourself? Because I know you said earlier that you didn't really particularly care for police. I listened to one of your podcasts, and I'll give you a chance to talk about that if you like. And I believe you said that even your wife's family didn't really care for police. And yet you not only became a police officer, but you went to probably what would be considered one of the worst parts of town. And then you had this spark that ignited in you that was, as you said, was embedded there. But were you kind of surprised yourself?
Absolutely. When I say I didn't want to be there, I didn't want to be there. I got on my knees and said, God, you said you never put on anything on me that I couldn't bear. Don't send me there. And he sent me there anyway, but he knew what he was doing. That's all I always say. He knew what he was doing. I didn't. And when I saw the tragedies, I wanted out so bad. I just wanted out so bad because it hurt. I'm a sensitive guy in the best of ways. I feel things. And I initially felt, I can't fix this. I don't like being in situations that I can't fix. I hate that. I'm a control freak.
Mhm.
But what kept happening was people would look into my eyes, no joke, and they would say, "There's something about you, man. You're going to help me. This guy stabbed me down the street. I know it's time for you to go home. You look tired, but you're going to help me. There's something about you." And I would. Discovering real injustice, real tangible, not theories, real injustice. When I saw a homeless man who got stabbed sitting on the sidewalk, and I pull up next to him. This is early in my career in Skid Row. And I pull up next to him, my partner. I go, "Are you okay?" And he moves his hand, and his intestines are hanging out.
Oh my
And
goodness.
I'm like, "Bro, you need to go to the doctor." I said, "Who did that to you?" And he points to a guy, a bald-headed guy, parolee, walking down the street. And I go and I arrest this man. He's just calmly walking down the street. And when I put the handcuffs on him, he says, "You must be new. I'm going to be out in 2 days. The DA is going to reject this case. This is Kid Bro, man." And I was
Man.
like, "Oh, hell no." So I went to the station and I wrote the world's greatest police report. Keep in mind, I'm from the Long Beach Unified School District. I had issues with dangling participles and antecedents, and I still do to this day. But I sat down and went line by line and made sure everything was in order for a homeless man who had been stabbed. And I turned this report in to the watch commander. It went to the DA's office. 2 days later, I get back from a couple of days off and I see, guess who I see walking down the street? The same guy. And he walks past my car and he said, "I told you." And I'm like, angry, I'm livid. So I drive to the station like a bat out of hell. And I storm into the detectives. I say, "Hey, what happened here? I wrote the hell out of this report. There's a victim who was stabbed on the side with his injury. What happened?"
Mhm.
And the detective looks at me and says, "Not on us." She gave me the disposition and it said, "District Attorney reject because the victim has a history of narcotics addiction and a criminal record."
Wow.
And I said to myself, this is injustice. And this kept happening over and over and over again. And that's when I realized that these people needed somebody. They needed somebody. I wasn't perfect. I wasn't Superman. I didn't claim to have all the answers, but something about them, something about that area said, you need to be here to show these people you care. They needed to see love from a place they were indoctrinated not to expect it. And that's why I stayed. And it's been an incredible journey. Heartbreaking at times, traumatic, disheartening, but the rewards when they come, it's just incredible. It's a blessing.
I cannot imagine that scenario that you just laid out. Um, I say as a police officer, when you're rookie, you're gung ho. You're going to save the world. You're going to go out and arrest everybody. Ain't nobody getting out. And it takes
Yep.
about 2 years, 3 years. You realize some of what that guy said is true, not to that extent, but you realize, you know what, I'm doing my part and I'm making this a better place as best I can. But it does seem like a revolving door. And I can see how easy it is to get apathetic about those things because you see these guys you arrest and they're right back out and they're committing more crimes or whatever. But to have it that blatant, I just
Yeah.
could not imagine being in that type of situation. I would just want to throw my hands up and say, man, why am I doing this?
There were many times where I did, and this is where I believe God comes into play. Like I know my purpose is there because every time I wanted to quit, conveniently, he would say, the day I said, "I'm done here, let me get out of this division, let me go to 77 where it's run and gun, let me go to Hollywood where I can look at celebrities and get some autographs." The good Lord would send somebody who I arrested 3 years ago, or I talked to, or I prayed for, and they would come to the station and say, "Hey, do you remember me?" And I'm like, "No," because they had gained weight, they had teeth, they got their teeth fixed, and they would stick their hand out and say, "Here, these are 2-year candles for me being clean and sober. Here's a flat from Narcotics Anonymous. I would not have done this if you wouldn't have stopped, arrested me, and talked to me." And when you hear things like that, you know, it's not, that's why I say the reward. It's
Yes.
just so big. You just get hungry, so you want to create more of that. Now I understand my parents because I never understood why they just kept taking in broken kids, kept bringing in stray animals who got hit by cars off the street. There was just, I see it. I got it right then, and I became addicted just like them to trying to make the world a better place for those that the world forgot. And yeah, that's my motivator. That's what keeps me going.
That is amazing. And to think, you recognize obviously that your parents put that in you. They instilled that in you. You probably didn't realize it at the time, but
No, I
as you
didn't.
said, God knew what he was doing. And right at the right time, those things came out. That is just amazing. It really is.
I literally, I literally said I did not want to be like my parents. I love my parents. My parents were my heroes, but my parents had so much heartache. They had people turn on them, just like I've had people turn on me. They've had they lost businesses, lost money helping people. I said that's not going to be. God bless you guys, not me. I
Yeah.
turned out to be just like him.
Yeah.
Just like him.
That's tough. I mean, that's why people build up barriers. That's why people are afraid to let folks in, because when you become vulnerable like that, then it's easy to get hurt. And who wants to continue to get hurt over and over by the people that you are at the very least trying to help, and oftentimes the
Right.
people that you love, that's who
Yeah.
hurts you the most.
I had to grow up. I had to grow up and realize that people are going to let you down.
Yeah.
You might have to help one person 5, 6, 7, 8 times, and it's that eighth time that you come that they're finally ready. That they're finally ready. There was a wonderful young lady named Mimi. It's one of the most heartbreaking things that ever happened to me in my career, and she was a stone cold heroin addict.
Hmm.
How I met her was I was driving down the street and she jumped in front of my car looking for a lawsuit. Right. So,
No way.
yeah, yeah. So I hit the brakes and I'm like, I missed her by that much. And she's cussing me out and it's like, oh, my neck. Oh, I'm gonna make a complaint. Woo, woo, woo. And I get out of the car and I was like, baby, hey, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do it. It was an accident. And then some guy in a tent says, girl, I saw you. You did that on purpose. And she gets mad and runs over and tries to kick him. And I have to grab her and I have to calm her down telling corny jokes, right? And I calmed her down and she looked at me and says, I would make a complaint against you, but you're cute. So I was like, thank God for the cuteness back then. I'm not as cute as I used to be, right? So, so from that point on, she just became fixated on me. And when I'd be driving in a patrol car, she'd run up to my car. Hi, Joseph, how you doing? Can I pray for you? I'm like, you look like you need more prayer than I do. That was my crazy mentality, right?
Yeah.
But I'd let her do it. And then I'd see her at her worst. One time I saw her with a needle in her arm, about to pass out. And I said, Mimi, and I tapped her and she looked and she was so embarrassed because it was me, because she saw me as her big brother. And she said, I don't want you to
What
see
you
me like
thought
this.
about her.
Yeah, yeah. And she said, can you pray for me? And I'm like, I'm a government official and all. I can't do it, but in the name of Jesus, let me holler at you, right? So this is what happened to her. This is where I learned not to judge people. Even though Mimi was a stone cold crack and heroin addict, she wasn't just that. She was a hero. On a cold night, we went to the east side to respond to a call of a kidnap in progress. And on the far east side, there was this row of tents, 40 tents. And the gang members took over all the tents and it was crazy bonfire stuff set on fire. We're parked next to a green tent. And I get on my PA and I go, hey, somebody call the police. And of course, everybody was like, nope, ain't nothing going on over here, right? Like they always do. So my partner says, let's get the hell out of here. So we start to drive. And as we drive about 50 feet, I see this skinny, shadowy figure jumping up and screaming, RoboCop, RoboCop, stop, stop, stop. And I look, and it's my friend Mimi. And she comes up to the car, that tent you guys were parked next to. They're going to kill him. They're going to kill him. I swear. I hate this stuff. I hate this stuff. Joseph, please go save him. Backed the car up, popped open the tent. And sure enough, 2 guys had kidnapped some drug addict from West LA who drove over in his Mercedes to buy dope in Skid Row. So we saved that man. So Mimi wasn't just a crack addict. She was a hero. Now, a couple months later, I go to the station and the detectives call me into the office and say, homicide detectives, they say, hey, Joseph, there was a homicide in the area and everybody tells me you're the man, you know everybody out there. Can you help us with it? I was like, oh man, sure. I know a girl named Mimi. She lives right over there. She's going to help me. She'll help you. She hates the crime over there. She may be an addict, but she's a good lady. And when I said Mimi, the detective kind of like sighs. And then he walks over to his desk and grabs a file. And he opens the file and shows me a picture of my friend Mimi on the sidewalk with a belt tied around her neck.
Oh.
She went to sleep on the sidewalk and somebody just randomly strangulated her. And that was another thing that motivated. That crushed me. That was the first time I cried as a police officer. And I was told when I was young, don't cry, don't show emotions.
Yeah.
I couldn't help it. I loved her to death. She had 2 daughters she'd been trying to get back home to. But that taught me this lesson, that because somebody's cracked out, methed out, sexed out, ganged out, it doesn't mean they're not loved by somebody. Right. It doesn't mean that they're not salvageable. And Mimi, though she was an addict, she was a hero. So, I just was inspired by Mimi and a couple of other deaths just to try to create an environment where that doesn't happen again. And it's incredible that people fight me on it, but I'm going to keep doing it. I'm going to keep trying.
That's amazing. And I think we can all learn something from that. I serve on a couple of boards here in Chattanooga, and both of them deal with people that are either experiencing homelessness or very, very close to it. And I've had some opportunities to go out into the homeless communities here, and while it's nothing like Skid Row, it still just breaks your heart. And and what really struck me was how most of the people that I encountered were so kind and so giving. They didn't have anything to give, but they were going to give it to you if they could. They had their community. They were sharing, what they had with each other. And I saw people that looked happier where they were than folks that have what appears to be everything in the world and just miserable.
Right.
And then I learned, they're out here for a lot of different reasons. Some people just choose it for whatever reason. They're just more comfortable there. Yes, there's some that have habits. They're addicted to drugs. But I've also know people now that are in the same circles that I'm in, that at some period in their life they experienced homelessness, whether it was they had to sleep in their car for a couple of weeks or a month or whatever.
Absolutely.
So you never know. Anyone can come across an unfortunate situation that they can end up in that place, and
Absolutely.
you never know what you're going to do when you get there or how you're going to get out. So it's just
Yeah,
it
yeah,
does help
yeah.
open your eyes to that.
And I think the cool thing about my walk and the walk of many other officers who are doing, and not just officers, firefighters, is we do know. I know everybody out on those streets, with the exception of the current environment where we have new faces coming and I have to get to know them. But I've known some of these guys since Bill Clinton was in office, you
Wow.
know, and I know when they're going to binge. I know when they haven't been taking their medication. I know their parents call me. They hit me up on social media, email, phone call. Can you help me find my son or daughter? So I do know, and knowing helps me to figure out or better identify what's needed to help one individual over the other. Because right now the problem is we have political figures who are trying to bring broad brush solutions or universal fixes to homelessness,
Mm-hmm.
and that doesn't work. There are some people that need a push. So sadly, there are some people that need to get arrested and not be arrested for the sake of sending them to prison for the rest of their life, but forcing them to go to mandatory drug programs, which they now took away from us. And now nobody's getting clean. It's far worse than it was years ago when we could take them to jail. They'd be in jail for about 3 months. They'd get cleaned up, get the stuff out of their system, and be mandated to go to a program. There are others that don't need a push. They just need an environment. You have other homeless who are in shelters who just need that safe environment to just be homeless and get on their feet. And that's hard to do when you're in a shelter and the drug dealers keep coming in and out and terrorizing everybody and dangling drugs in front of their face. And, so there's different levels, different needs. And being in Skid Row for so long, I've been able to identify that better than most politicians and activists who are looking at it either from a 30,000 foot view from what they read in the paper or have some kind of political agenda and don't even want the area to change. Because if you take away Skid Row, you take away that image of homelessness that you can prostitute for money and donations and activism and things like that. So, I'm able to see it. I'm not left or right. I don't have a dog in the fight. I see the truth, and I just hope one day someone will take the time to listen to me before it's too late, because they always call me when it's too late. Don't call me when it's too late.
Yeah. So I'm gonna in the second half we'll take a break in a bit, but when we come back, I want to talk about some of those entrepreneurial spirits that you mentioned that kind of complained on you for them just being entrepreneurs in certain places, and we'll talk about that.
Lord. No.
But
Yeah.
you have a special interest in mental illness as well. We've touched on it a little bit, but you've been experiencing or dealing with that a lot. So let's just talk about the mental illness aspects of things and what you're doing and what you've experienced out there and what you feel, how we can help these people.
Well, mixed in with homelessness is equally the biggest challenge that we're facing in places like Skid Row, and that is mental health. Why that's so near and dear to me is because I raised a niece who was mentally ill for 30 years of her life. I helped raise her with my parents, and now she's with her sister, and they're taking care of her through conservatorship, which is another important key factor. But when I got to Skid Row and started noticing the mentally ill people who were being dropped off by hospitals, it really, really changed my life and my desire to be vocal. I just wanted to be that cop to just do my job, collect my paycheck, be quiet, and say, hey, I did my job for the day. But when I started seeing these systemic failures of people struggling with mental illness, it was time for me to stand up and speak out. And I've been doing that for the past 15 years. And America's solution to quote unquote helping the mentally ill is to, in the 70s, close down the asylums, which I agree were inhumane. But I hate the American idea of if there's something wrong, throw the baby out with the bathwater. No, you fix the bathwater so you can bathe the baby. Yes. But that's not how they do things in America. Let's just get rid of it all. Mm-hmm. And people want to make it a political issue. Oh, blame Reagan. No, you have to blame Reagan. You have to blame the ACLU. who was one of my heroes personally. But
let me
they're
see.
all
Hold on. You kind of froze up. You said you have to blame Reagan, and I think you said the ACLU, and then
yeah, you could blame Reagan, the ACLU, and even going back to John F. Kennedy. They started chipping away at that for years. So it's not a left or right issue. When you politically polarize it, you don't see the truth. But anyway, so as a result of that, the asylums were closed down. A lot of these folks were released into the street, and then civil liberties groups sued, so the asylums never came back, because they thought that you could manage these people on their own, with these severe illnesses. So some of the people fell into the loving arms of family members, some who tried to handle it, tried to love them. But you had many of them end up being dumped in or wandering into places like Skid Row, because it was the only place that had services like food, clothes, and a hot meal. So when these individuals get to places like Skid Row, and they stop taking their prescribed medication. And here's why. Because their prescribed medication makes them feel down, it makes them feel lethargic. And in Skid Row is what my sons call turned up. You can't be down and turned up, right? You can't. So they'll take their prescribed medication and they'll sell it or get rid of it or give it away, and then start self-medicating on the hard stuff like crack cocaine, methamphetamine, spice, and even marijuana. And I'm sorry, marijuana may not affect you or me, but someone struggling with bipolar or schizophrenia, it can have disastrous consequences. But anyway, and who's there to medicate them? The Crips and the Bloods and the 18th Street and everybody else who doesn't care that they have a problem. They're just trying to make a buck. I've always said this, and any law enforcement officer worth their weight in gold will say this: it is not a crime to be mentally ill. It's not a crime to be bipolar. It's not a crime to be paranoid schizophrenic. It's not a crime to be depressed or any of those things. But when those things meet addiction and disenfranchisement and homelessness, that's when they become a police problem. When they're medicating on taking drugs. I'm going to just stop saying self-medicating, because that's a pretty buzzword to try to take stigma. We need the stigma so people can really see the sense of urgency. When they start using drugs and destroying themselves, when they're swinging a bat in the middle of the street, when they're stabbing somebody, when they're assaulting people, that's when they become a police problem. When I show up and they're swinging a bat at people and they don't even see me as a police officer, they see a 6-foot spider with a Santa Claus hat on, and now I have to physically use force to stop them. In not most cases, but in some cases we have to, especially when there's a chemical buffer between them, us, and the crisis that they're facing. And a lot of people come away with the misconception that, police, they just don't know what to do. Look, it doesn't matter how much training you give us. It's not about training or lack of compassion. What do you do when there's that chemical buffer? And I love it when these mental health experts say, we are the solution. These folks have been out there for decades. We haven't seen you.
Yeah.
And then when you do finally go out there and you see one of these people doing backflips in front of a city bus, guess what you do? You call the police. See, that's the stuff that's not being told about mental illness. And it's unfortunate because there's a lot of mentally ill friends of mine who actually developed a relationship with. And I saw them when they stopped taking their medication. One lady in particular, I'll call her Margaret. Margaret hated my guts. And that's when I first met. She cussed me from the rooter to the tutor. Told my family they're gonna all die of AIDS. So once again, I pull out these corny dad jokes, and for weeks and weeks and weeks, until one day I made her laugh. And she says, excuse my friends, you MFer, you made me laugh today. And I was like, okay, so we started talking. And I discovered that Margaret was a graduate of a university. She wanted to be a lawyer, So she said, Joseph, can you help me get housing? Now, at the time, I had no resources for her. I didn't know anything. I was a young police officer. I didn't have nothing. I said, I don't know what to tell you. All I can do is pray for you. Mm-hmm. But a couple of years later, she did get housed in one of the most drug-infested hotels in Skid Row. Because they always say, if you house them first, that's the answer. That's not true. She gets in the hotel and she has to live by herself. And she's alone with her demons, with her voices talking to her, 10 voices telling her to kill herself.
Wow.
So she tries to calm those voices through smoking drugs, which only makes them worse. So she went down the hall and stabbed 2 of her friends, saying that there were alligators who broke into her friend's room. And I responded to that call.
Wow.
And I get there and I'm like, who did this? And one of the ladies who could talk points down the hall and says, that B sitting in the hall right there. And I look and there's a woman sitting in a trench coat, sweating, rocking, sitting with her legs crossed, laughing and sweating in a state of mania, bragging about how she just killed 2 alligators. Pair of sewing scissors in her hands, crack pipe in the other, and an empty bottle of pills hanging out of her pocket. Margaret was my friend. Guess who sent Margaret to prison? Her friend.
Yeah.
Now, I understand from a legal standpoint, I understand from a public safety standpoint why that happened. But on a moral standpoint, that was wrong because the system failed her long before she stabbed those two people. That wasn't even her fault.
Right.
So this is what I'm trying to get people to do is understand the urgency with the issue of mental illness. Currently, the only solution they give law enforcement officers as it relates to quote unquote helping the mentally ill when they go into crisis is a 72-hour hold, which is nothing. It's not even 72 hours anymore. It's 6 hours. They sprinkle pills on them and ask them if they're okay. And of course, the answer is going to be, I'm fine. Because what do they want to do? They want to go back out there and smoke drugs, and the cycle continues. If you really care about solving the crisis of mental health, at least making it better than what it is now, it should never be 72 hours. It should be 6 weeks. And here's why. Because it takes 6 weeks for their prescribed medication for them to even benefit from the therapeutic attributes, right? Then on top of that, if they're dual diagnosed, which many of them are, you got to detox them first so they can hear you.
Right.
Once you detox them, the experts can develop a rapport, find out who their loved ones are, and connect them with their loved ones so they can get conservatorship. But also, we need our civic leaders to find a way to streamline and speed up the process of conservatorship and make sure that these folks don't get released in 6 hours or less. You wouldn't send a heart patient fresh off of an operating table into the streets, right? No, you keep them in the hospital around, do therapy and all that. Why do we do that for the mentally ill? So I always ask people, who's failing these people? Is it the police or the system? Clearly, it's the system, unfortunately, but people love making us the scapegoat for these systemic failures when things don't work out, when their own plans fail. And that's not going to change. I don't care how much rhetoric you hear from politicians. It's not going to change until that changes. And that's the truth. That's the truth. So it's really a tragic situation what we're seeing. Someone's loved one. One story was two parents from Baltimore. Indiana, I'm sorry. They were looking for their daughter. And they work with a social service group to try to help get conservatorship. But every time they would get the approval, the daughter would get sent to a hospital and she'd get out in 3 hours. So this time I got her. She was walking down the street with peanut butter in her hair, butt naked with a knife. Sounds like somebody who meets the criteria, right?
Yeah.
So I see her, I say, look, we're gonna get you to the hospital. And I got so excited, I ran upstairs. I said, I know they're gonna keep her for 14 days. I just knew it. I get on the phone with the parents. I got her, get your butts down here. Come on down. They got down here. By the time they got here, they released her in 12 hours. And the cycle continues. Eventually, I was able to get her reunited, help with the process of getting her conservatorship. But think of how many times that woman was raped. Think about how many times that woman is, think how many people that woman hurt because we don't care enough to sit back, reassess failure, and try to do it a different way.
Wow.
So that's why I'm so passionate. I don't want to see any more people who are ill and through no fault of their own commit crimes or become victims of crime. Yes, police should be a part of that solution, but we're not the solution because we're still going to be needed. But we do need to change the laws and conservatorship to make things better. We have to.
Absolutely. Man, you said a mouthful, and that's a good place for us to take a break. And when we come back, we're going to lighten the mood a little bit. We're going to talk about some of your funnier calls, some of the silly calls you've been on. We're going to talk about this entrepreneurial that filed complaints on you time and time again, and maybe find out a little bit why they call you RoboCop. I know the story about Venice Beach. We might talk about that a little bit when we come back. Yeah. So don't go away. We'll be right back with Deon Joseph. Thank you for listening. All right, welcome back to 911. What? Thank you so much for checking in with us. We are on today with Mr. Deon Joseph, 25 plus years with the LAPD. You know, you see these guys on TV all the time, LAPD. So TV shows, how much of that is real when they're trying? SWAT, that's my main one right now. I watch SWAT and I get so mad. I don't know any SWAT team that's equipped as well as the LAPD SWAT team, according to this TV show. Is that real?
Let me tell you something. I hate cop shows with a passion because, you know, do you know people actually believe that's their sense of reality about policing? That's why they get mad at us and shooting. Why did it take 9 shots? Because you're sitting here watching a Hollywood movie where Clint Eastwood blows somebody away with 1 bullet and then the pretty music comes on and he goes has a beer afterwards, right?
Yes.
That's just, I hate it. I hate it. The only cop drama that I fell in love with but could not watch while I was on vacation was The Wire. That was the most realistic. I felt like I was at work. I just couldn't watch it anymore. I had to watch it. You know, I have to like just take a time out because it was real. That was very real. But outside of that, these cop dramas are so stupid. And I wish people would stop because it gives them a false sense of the reality of the job. Like people really think I can, shoot a car and it blows up with one bullet.
Yeah.
Like stop.
Yeah.
Stop it.
Or think that the SWAT team actually does investigate cases and they have all these resources and all they're going to do is just, come in and just spend days investigating and tracking this person down and got all forensics and computers. I'm like, SWAT, at least here, the SWAT team is not even full time. You get a call, the SWAT team assembles, they go in, they do the job, and they go back to their regular job,
And they get on about their business. That's the reality. They're well equipped, well trained, incredible guys, but stop lying to the public, please.
That would go up. The media in general would go. It would do everyone a favor by just telling the truth. Period.
Reality. Yeah.
Yes. So we'll start with this. You said there was a gentleman that complained on you a time or two because he was just trying to, he was a businessman out in front of a particular place doing his thing. Tell us about that.
This guy. It wasn't one or two times. He made 28 complaints on me in 1 year.
In 1 year?
And 1 year. Like, man, if they looked at my rap sheet today, they'd be like, oh, 28 complaints. Oh, he's the worst officer on the planet.
Wow.
And his complaint was I wouldn't allow him to sell beers illegally in front of an Alcoholics Anonymous program. That was his complaint. He was bold about it.
You gotta respect the hustle. He's selling beer in front of AA.
I mean, imagine being in line, going to your program, getting offered a steel reserve 211 or an old English 800. This guy just would not stop. I arrested this guy, I think myself, 20 times. And then we had our other officer arrest him 30 times. He was arrested over 50 times, but he hated my guts because I wouldn't let him sell beer. And it just angered me that the system kept slapping him on the wrist and letting him out. Because what did that tell him?
Yes.
You can't stop me.
Yes.
And to this day, he still does it. But there's a good news behind that. I reunited him with his sister. And she's trying to convince him to come back home to New Orleans. So I'm praying that this is the time that the guy gets to go home. But that guy is something else. Like, he was a cause for a lot of our violent crime in that era. Because like I said, when people get drunk, several things happen to them. They're either, very loving and fall all over you. I love you, man. Or they're the opposite. I'm King Kong and I can fight everybody on this block, and they get their butt kicked or they hurt somebody else. So yeah, that was a crazy moment in my career that, hey, it is what it is.
That's funny. And we joke about that because it is so funny and so absurd. But what you just described with Skid Row is very similar. These people are trying to get cleaned up, but their dealers and all the temptations and all the things that they're trying to stay away from are right there in their face.
Right there.
And they don't have the support to get away from it. And here they are still, hey, you want this, you want this, you want this. I mean, I can imagine trying to get cleaned up right in the middle of my drug of choice.
Yeah, and that's why I'm so angry when they don't file charges on these guys. If you're serious about Skid Row being a recovery zone, then you should be just as passionate as I am as trying to keep these individuals away. I'll never forget, I had this gang member barred from the area, and it worked. He was gone for 2 years. Every time he came into the area, my officer would see him, they'd arrest him, or I'd arrest him, and it worked because he couldn't make any money. Eventually, he stayed away. So he got arrested a second time, and he went in front of a judge, and the judge says, this injunction is a banishment. You're keeping him away from programs that he needs. No. Yeah, he needs those programs to sell drugs.
Wow.
And they basically set him free, and he was able to come back. People don't understand what we're up against with the justice system. It's like even the justice system is gone woke, and it's scary. It's scary. These criminals are just getting away with everything. It's scary.
So you mean to tell me having a woke justice system is not necessarily good?
Not really a good thing in 2021. And the crime data kind of shows that right now.
Wow. This next story, I had to read it a couple of times to really figure out why it was really, and then I just cracked up. You said you had a call where I think you called him a little person was hanging off a one-story building.
Oh yeah, this guy is off the chain, and every now and then he gets high and he starts doing backflips in the streets, fighting with city buses and everything else. And on this day, he decided to climb a 2-story building, and he was kind of hanging off the side, and nobody was able to get him down. And they want us to be so kinder and gentler, and we all did it. We were all like, "Sir, please, sir," and he was like, "F you, boo, 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 I'll pee in your face," and all this stuff like that. So finally, I get to the scene, and I said, "Forget all this nice stuff. Man, get your ass down before I come up there and throw you off." And he jumped down. And he jumped down to my arms, and everything was good.
So, you caught him?
So people need to understand that a lot of times with policing, when you see us yelling or using what we call strong language, it's tactical. It's an act. I'm not really a jerk.
Mhm.
But for some people, please, sir, yes, ma'am works. But for others, I've saved people's life with MF,
Yeah.
get on the ground, or MF, put the gun down before I do F1, because please, sir, please, ma'am didn't work. So it's not because I'm a jerk. You just sometimes, especially I'm from Long Beach, LA, you have to know how to read your audience and know what works for some people, because for some people being nice actually agitates them. So sometimes you just have to change it up a little bit, but there's no real animosity behind it. We're just sometimes have to be great actors.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a job. It's a job, and you have to speak. You have to know how to speak to your audience.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right about the acting. I'm not a big guy now. Your nickname is RoboCop. We've thrown that out there a couple of times, and if you're watching this podcast instead of listening, you can pretty much see why we call him RoboCop. And I know why you're strutting around Venice Beach, as I heard in your podcast earlier on. But
Yeah.
RoboCop, tell me about that. How'd you get that nickname?
Well, when I first started in Skid Row, once again, I was passionate about victims. So my whole thing was go out there and put as many bad guys in the back of my patrol cars as I possibly can. Focus on violent criminals, drug dealers, murderers. And if I arrested an addict, it was to get information on a bigger drug dealer. So the perception of the community was I was this big, mean guy with a whole bunch of equipment on who was coming to ruin their lives, and they couldn't get away from me. They said I walked like a robot, and when they tried to escape, you couldn't hide from me. And so someone called me RoboCop. And the other name that's a relation to that is Decepticon.
Decepticon.
You pretend to love the community, but you just want to put us all in jail, right? So,
That's
so that name stuck for a good while. But I like how it's evolved. See, when I first got to Skid Row, it was Uncle Tom, House Negro, Sambo, all the other horrible names we get called, right?
Right.
Then came RoboCop when they saw that I was really serious about fighting crime. As time went on, people started to respect me a little more. It went from RoboCop to more funny names like Officer Tight Shirt, Officer Male Stripper, Officer, all these other things, right? And then as time went on and people saw me for who I was and realized that the reason I was doing it was for them and not to them, and I took a more community-oriented approach, the name changed from those names to Angel, Officer Goddaddy, Uncle. Yeah, I'm glad they left the Tom off. Uncle. Yes. And then finally, my favorite is when they call me Deon. That means I became like family to them. So yeah, that was the origin of the RoboCop story.
Wow. Were you one of these that had just all kinds of gadgets hanging off your belt?
Man, I had 3 handcuffs. I had a taser. I had a beanbag shotgun slapped over. I had all kind of stuff. And I had stuff hanging out my pockets and gloves everywhere. Radioactive equipment. I don't know what I had on there, but
that's bad. I know you were something. You had on 3 pair of cuffs. I know when I first came out of the academy, I was bad, and I just had 2 pair of cuffs.
No, I told her. I said on average, I want to try to get 3 felons a day. That was my goal when I got out there. And when I was out there and able to work, I did just that. And it was a good time. Like, to me, it was very noble for me, and it still is, in my opinion, to go out there and arrest people who prey on people. The problem is we're just not working in a system that supports that. So when you're going through that, you just have to change how you do things. I still cared about the community just as much then as I do now. It's just I realized that when you're working in a system that doesn't support you, you just have to adjust, adapt, and find a different way to be successful. And that's what I do.
Sure. I may have to get you back because community policing is a whole nother thing, and maybe talk about that sometime and what community policing means to you. But I got to keep going. I want to get to this rapper, Mr. Was it SAHIF? Tell me about that.
Yeah. So I'm driving down San Julian and I see this guy and he goes, "Hey, what's up, RoboCop?" I said, "Well, what's going on, man?" I said, "You look familiar, man. What's your name?" "Oh, you don't know me." I said, "No, I seen you around, bro." I was just trying to get to know him. He goes, "Yeah, I'm SAHIF." I said, "SAHIF?" He said, "Yeah, I rap." I said, "Yeah, I'm MC SAHIF." I was like, "Okay, what is that, a Muslim name or something like that?" "No." I said, "Well, what does it mean?" "It means," well, no, what did he say? He said, I said, "Why do you call yourself SAHIF?" He said, no, I said, "What does SAHIF stand for?" He says, "MC stab a hole in the face." And I was like, "What? Why would you call yourself such a horrible name?" And he looks at me and he says, "Because I stabbed a hole in the face." That's what he was on parole for. So I just put my hand on my head and put the car in drive and just kept on driving.
Oh, well,
Like,
he's keeping it real.
I guess.
Oh my goodness. Oh man, that's funny. Yeah, he just keeping it real, just keeping it real. And then you had a interesting encounter when you were on your way or about to go to a parole meeting.
Oh Lord. Well, but now back then I was a handsome guy. I had a little hair,
Mr. Venice
like
Beach.
Mr. Venice Beach. I had a little waist, and so I go to a parole hearing for a parolee that just assaulted somebody. And as I'm waiting, this beautiful, beautiful sister comes in too, and she's dressed to the nines, high heels, just looking stunning. And she sees me, and I see her, and our eyes met, but I couldn't do nothing with it because I'm married, right? So,
Yeah.
but I know, like, I was enjoying the attention. So she's smiling and winking. She's, "How you doing?" We had this great conversation. She's smart. She's intelligent. And then after 5 minutes of talking, I hear this. I hear a sheriff deputy say, "Johnson, Johnson." And I'm like, "I'm Joseph. I'm not talking to you, sir. Johnson." And she goes like this, "I'm here, sir." And I'm like, so she's an attorney. I think she's an attorney or something because she's looking so great. And then she stands up, and the deputy shackles her from hand and wrap around her waist and put chains on her feet and everything, and then led her into the room. And I was like, "Oh Lord have mercy." I was pitching voodoo to a criminal. What the hell's going on? But but that was so shocking the way it went down. But I tell you, she was banging. She was a fine woman, and
Well, see,
that was funny.
that probably would have been one of my most embarrassing moments. But you actually have another most embarrassing moment that you mentioned, Dylan. Is it Elysian Park?
Oh God, Elysian Park. I was a vice investigator, right? And our job was to deal with lewd activity, prostitution, gambling. And so every now and then we'd have to go because we get complaints to the Elysian Park trails because people will go up there and have sex in the trees and in public.
Sure.
So I'm like, okay, yeah, all right. There's families playing in the park and people getting it on. All right. So they send me, and now here I am, this good Christian boy, I've never been exposed to a whole lot of stuff, but they're just throwing me into the woods, right? So they send me in there, right? So there's this thing in the woods where if a guy is attracted to you or somebody's attracted to you, they jump out of the bush and bite into a stick. So as I'm walking in the woods, I hear this crunch, 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 crunch.
You hear people biting sticks all down the line.
So I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. So all of a sudden, this guy comes up and he sees me. He loves. Hey, nothing wrong with that. Do you, right? But he comes up to me and he says, "Hi, I'm Bear." I'm like, "Hi, Mr. Bear. How you doing?" And he goes, "You look nervous. Are you new here?" No, I come here all the time, right? And he says, "Let me break the ice real quick." And he comes up and grabs me by the nipples and twists, and I'm like, "Ah!" and I like gave the violation. I got him. Hey, we detain him, and everybody comes running, and they go, "Dude, that's not a violation." But he twisted my nipples.
Had to be something. He violated me anyway.
I didn't want it. And I had to let him go. But Mr. Bear, he got to feel my nipples that day. God bless you, Mr. Bear.
That is funny. And let's see. You have so much. I'm definitely gonna have to have you come back. But this is something I never experienced, and I believe again, Hollywood makes you think all cops experience it. But you actually were involved in a shootout.
Well, I got there late after the shoot. There was a North Hollywood shootout, one of the worst shootings in LA history. And if anybody knows about that, it was North Hollywood. Some bank robbers came in with high-powered weapons and robbed a bank, and the police had to respond. And multiple officers were shot. Citizens were hurt as well. And I remember being in the watch commander's office at Venice Beach, and we're looking at the screen, and this is going down, and the watch commander looks at me and says, "Hey, rookie, get your helmet. You got to go." And I was like, okay. Jumped in the car with my training officer, responded to North Hollywood. I think we got there 20 minutes after the shooting happened. We got there pretty quick. And they had me standing at a post somewhere near the shooting. And I was standing next to a telephone pole, and I was holding tight with my shotgun, right? Mm-hmm. And then I heard over the radio someone say that there was 3 more suspects walking through the backyard near where I was at. And I was like, Lord have mercy. I'm about to die, and I'm going to shoot the first thing coming out wearing a black mask, right?
Yes.
And it turned out to be our SWAT team who was going through the house and searching through the area. But that was one of the scariest moments of my life. Like I was literally right there. And thankfully, those officers, no one died that day, and those officers were so heroic. But that was a very terrifying moment. And what was sad was my wife worked at DWP, and it was like real close, like I think right around the corner. And a lady comes in there, and they're all watching the shooting, and I had just arrived there, so the lady's watching it on TV with my wife, and the lady comes in there to pay a bill and says, "I hope they kill every one of those cops."
Oh my
And
God.
my wife was like, "B, one of those cops was my husband." And the lady was like, "Oh." So that was so disheartening to hear
Mm-hmm.
that we had people out there rooting for us to die. But what made up for it was when we went home, and we were out there for hours. So we finally went home. I don't remember what time it was, 2 o'clock in the morning. We're on the freeway driving home to Venice. And there were cars pulling up next to us, rolling their windows down, saying thank you. I'm talking about Black people, white people, people all saying thank you guys so much. We appreciate you. Thank you guys. So that let me know the world didn't hate us. And to me, if you guys are out there and you see a police officer and you really support cops, you may not understand it all. You may not agree with everything going on with the negative exception. Neither do we. Please take the time to let a cop know how much you appreciate them. They need it right now. They really do.
That's good. Now, was this the one where the suspects were wearing body armor and everything?
Oh yeah, that's the one. That's the one.
That
That
I
was
remember watching it. All of America watched that on TV. I remember that. And that's when a lot of the tactical things changed. That's when I think because they were talking about how outgunned the police were. And then
yeah,
that's when a lot of the things changed and you start getting a lot more military style weapons and stuff. I remember that.
yeah. Yeah,
Wow.
the officers had to literally break into a gun shop to get weapons that match the suspects.
Yes.
So that's the reason for that, and it's necessary because once again, there's still bad guys out there. There are people who are actively want to engage in terror. That's a real thing. Thankfully, we see it, we get ahead of it, and most of the times we stop it. But that's a real thing. So before you start talking about demilitarizing the police, there are times where those things are warranted. But I'm sorry, we're not driving tanks down the street, so please stop telling people that.
Yes. Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow. So good. So good. So I'm going to let you kind of have the last words as we wrap up. You know what? You can go any way with this. What do you think some of the biggest misconceptions are about police, or what do you want the world to know about your job, about your profession? And what would you change if you had a magic wand? I know it's 3 different questions, but I'm just going to let you kind of take that and go where you want to with it.
What the people need to know about police officers is that the vast majority of the 800,000 men and women who wear a badge and gun are decent human beings. Are we perfect? No, we are human beings dealing with human beings. As a matter of fact, our job is as unpredictable as humanity is, and we're human beings doing it. So yes, there's a negative exception that's going to disappoint us all. But I can assure you that the vast majority of officers, no matter what their skin color, yes, to the Black folks out there, most of the white cops care and they love doing what they do.
Yes.
We have to stop judging people by the color of their skin and judge them by the content of their character and based on police shootings, the totality of their circumstances. That's important. But yes, cops from all the walks of life, they care. They're mostly good people. And yes, we hate the bad ones too, because we have to deal with the fallout. That's one thing you need to know about police officers. What else do you need to know? That we are not failing you. You may have seen the negative exception fail you and us, but for the most part, we haven't failed you. Law enforcement officers are dealing with when the system fails, when bad policy happens, when our politicians throw us under the bus and take money away from us that we need to help serve you better. Mm-hmm. And now the criminal element has increased, when they don't really care to really do anything of real value to the broken mental health system or help homelessness in a responsible way that includes accountability, housing, and shelter. Mm-hmm. Okay, and shelter. Because house first, that's not the answer. I'm sorry. It's not the answer because many of them don't want housing. Others need a push. So we're dealing with that. When we deal with those failures, that's what we're responding to. We haven't failed. The system has failed. And when that happens, people often make us the scapegoat for those failures and say we're a part of systemic racism. I strongly, strongly disagree with that. And that's pretty much it. You can still have faith in the police officer in 2021. And it's not just me. I'm just the one who was tired enough to stick my neck out and say, I need you to hear my story. I don't want anyone telling my story. I don't want Black Lives Matter telling my story. Mm-hmm. I don't want Antifa telling my story. And that's why I'm talking to you right now. And I'm encouraging officers out there across America that it's time for you to stop hiding. Come on out and tell people who you are. Let them know you're not racist. Let them know you don't hate people of color. Let them know you don't hate people because they're gay. You just have a tough job and we need to work together. And that's what I want to say. And I'll leave this last quote with my fellow officers, and hopefully it'll inspire you. My badge and gun and my handcuffs are not the means that I utilize to invoke positive change in the communities I serve. Mm-hmm. My heart, my faith, and my love for mankind will always be my unyielding dogs of war. If you adopt that in your tour of duties today, every day you say that to yourself, it's going to help you. It's going to help remind you of who you are. Listen, the real definition of a hero is not someone that goes out and just protects those who love us. The real definition of a hero is when you can go out there and protect those who loathe us as well.
Wow.
Hold your head up, guys. Keep doing your job. I love you. Be safe.
Wow, Deon, that's great. That's a great way to end this show. And again, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you all for listening to 91 What podcast. If you have any suggestions, shoot me an email, 91what.podcast@gmail.com. This has been great. I've been inspired. I've inspired, and I've learned a lot, about Skid Row, about the challenges and the how circular some of these things are. And it's been really, really incredible. And I appreciate you. I hope you'll come back because I have so much more that you shared that I looked at in my notes and I just can't get to it today, but I'll invite you back. If you ever need a platform, as this grows, give me a shout and I'll get it out there. And it's Deon Joseph. If you want to follow him I found him on LinkedIn. He's there and he's always got some encouraging things on LinkedIn. For those of you that are on LinkedIn, look him up there.
Yeah, they follow me on Twitter.
Okay.
You can follow me on Twitter, OFCR, Deon Joseph, or I have an Officer Joseph fan page on Facebook where I share my thoughts all the time. If you want to know who I am, it's right there for you. So I welcome it. And I welcome your comments and suggestions and friendly dialogue. I don't deal with trolls. Trolls get blocked and deleted. But if you want to have open dialogue with a police officer, I'm so willing to do that because I love everybody. I really do.
That's awesome. Well, I'll check that out myself. I appreciate it. Thank you guys so much. And we will see you on the next episode.